this hive is a good example of a hive that needs food. You know, a lot of people have questions about feeding in the spring. How much do I feed? For how long? Why do I feed at all? You know, really common issue that I see with brand new beekeepers is them not feeding enough. And they may feel like, hey, my hive isn't growing as quickly as it seems like it should. What's going on? And you've got to keep in mind that bees, especially when they're in a growth phase, they need a lot of food in order to draw out honeycomb and to grow as quickly as possible. So this hive right here was actually a package that we installed, actually on video, probably a month ago. Let's see, what is today? Today is May 6th. So yeah, it was about a month ago that we installed this package. And we fed, for point of reference, we fed this package 2 gallons of syrup in the past month, which isn't nearly enough. You can see they've got bees on about the middle 4 frames, and these outside frames, you know, they really haven't started drawing out foundation at all. And this would apply to a newly installed nook or even a single story hive. So here you can see that they have drawn out, this is the 4th frame on one side. They've drawn it out. They've got a little bit of pollen in there, but not a lot of nectar or stored syrup. You know, this time of year, I want to see multiple frames of stored syrup or honey in my hive. You know, I like in the brood boxes, I like to see, you know, this time of year, probably 3 to 4 frames of stored honey or syrup in each brood box. That's kind of my goal, and the rest should be brood. So here, you know, one of the big things I watch for is, you know, do I have a band of honey around my brood? So here, you know, I've got good cap brood, and I've got a little bit of honey and nectar around the edges, but not much. If you're looking at your frames in your hive and you've got brood in the middle and there is virtually no stored honey around the edge on most of the frames, I get pretty concerned. I mean, that's concerning to me when I'm not seeing, you know, a band of honey around the edges of those frames, and then some excess frames of honey as well. Now, once the honey flow really kicks into full gear, you shouldn't have to feed your bees. They're going to grow fine on natural nectar. But while they're in that early growth phase, they often need help, and they need you to do some feeding to really help them to grow as quickly as they need to grow. Now, what's kind of cool about this hive is we haven't fed it in a couple of weeks, and I came and checked it last week and it was on the verge of starvation. There was virtually no stored nectar. But this week, they've actually got pretty good bands of nectar now around the brood, and they've got a couple extra frames of honey on the outside. So you can kind of see that nectar all around the edges here. Not a lot, but there's a little bit. And so the honey flow is really starting. You know, they're really starting to bring in some honey, but it would still boost them a lot and help them if we did some feeding. I'm going to mark this queen. I found the queen here, and I'm gonna, just because, hey, we're out here, I'm gonna show you guys how to mark a queen really quickly. So first you need your marking pin. This year happens to be white, and you've got to find your queen. So finding your queen is the real battle. And so I'm going to try to get you a closer shot of her here, but she's right here. And so here's our queen. And so one of the important things when you're marking a queen is you want to pick her up by her thorax. So you don't want to hold her by her abdomen. Her abdomen is too soft. Now, the best advice I can give you is practice with drones. So pick up and mark 100 drones and then you're ready to mark a queen, because if you kind of squish a drone, no big deal. Now, you do need to either be wearing nitrile gloves or bear gloves. You don't want to be wearing, you know, bare hands. You don't want to be wearing leather gloves because they're too awkward, and you'll squish that queen as you try to pick her up. So I recommend nitrile gloves if you're nude, because it'll make you a little more comfortable about not getting stung. So put on your gloves, practice on a bunch of drones. You're gonna pick them up by the thorax with these 2 fingers, pick them up by the thorax, put a dot on that drone. So for marking the queen, I'm gonna pick her up right off the comb by the thorax. Now sometimes I have to kind of hold her a little bit and adjust a bit to get her held properly. And it's fine, she's pretty tough, just be very gentle. But you can see I'm holding her by her thorax. And so, you know, her thorax is where I'm putting the pressure to hold her very, very gently, which means her thorax is exposed so I can put a mark on it. So I've got her thorax exposed, I've got my marking pin, and now I'm just gonna put a dot. And there goes my camera. That's an opportune time. Sorry about that, guys. So I'm holding my queen right here by her thorax, and then I'm putting a little dot on her, right? Gently, you know, just putting a little mark. And then I like to hold her for just a couple of minutes. Not a couple minutes. Maybe 10 seconds. Let that mark dry just a little bit, because otherwise the bees will bite it off, and then release her back onto the frame. And you know, some marks will stay for a long time and others won't. You know, some bees, after a few months, they'll kind of chew that mark off the queen. Other bees, you know, they'll leave it on indefinitely. But there you go. So this hive, you know, like I said, we were talking about feeding, and we got sidetracked, which is easy to do when we're playing in the bee yard. But you can see they had about 2 frames of brood, and then they've got an outside frame. This outside frame is actually pretty much all nectar, which is awesome. So they've got, you know, a band of honey around 2 frames of brood, and then they've got 2 partial frames of honey or stored nectar. In general, I'd like to see a package further advanced than this one, or a nook. So if we had fed probably 4 gallons over the last month, I think you'd see this hive almost twice this size, because they can only grow if they have sufficient food. And so whether you newly installed a nook or a package or made a split, you know, make sure you're feeding them up to 1 gallon per week if they'll drink it, so that they can draw out new comb, raise baby bees, and grow as quickly as we want them to, so we can make a honey crop. If you don't care about making a honey crop, you don't have to be quite as aggressive on feeding. But if you want to make a honey crop, and this is especially if this is your first year in beekeeping or you've made splits, you got to feed to really help them grow. And my goal is to have their 2 brood boxes full of brood honey or stored syrup, so that when I put my honey super on, all that nectar that they bring in goes right into my honey supers, instead of having to fill up brood boxes with that precious nectar. So that's if you really want to optimize honey. You know, if honey isn't a huge goal of yours, then you can kind of just let them work through drawing out that foundation on more of a natural flow, but it'll certainly be slower.